it's important to hear a little bit about how I became an attorney and how I got to the place I am right now. Like Wally, I went to University of Illinois for undergrad, and I went to DePaul for law school. But my undergraduate training was as a professional musician. I was a trumpet player trying to get a job in an orchestra, symphony orchestra. And I was blessed to be fairly successful with it, but stress got the better of me over time. And it got to be more and more of a challenge to play. And I was out in the professional world. It got to be quite difficult to the point where it would literally physically shut me down in terms of being able to play. Sometimes I was on and sometimes I wasn't. I didn't know where things were going. So one little aside that I want to tell you, a little inside baseball about symphonies, that the string players tend to be known as the prima donnas of the orchestra. The trumpet players tend to be known as kind of the egocentric guys that are sitting in the back, and they have this big ego and they've got to run the show all the time. And oddly enough, for some reason there's a whole bunch of former trumpet players that are now lawyers, and I think that probably says something. But it's a true story. There's a bunch of them in Chicago alone. But as I said, stress tended to get the better of me in my musical career, and so it eventually ended my musical career. And went on to work in business for a few years, and decided at some point later on that law school was in the cards for me. And so I pursued that and entered law school, had an opportunity to choose between a few law schools, decided to go to DePaul. Law school, and I know at least one of my friends in the audience here, a fellow lawyer, can attest to this, that law school is a bundle of stress the whole time. It's incredibly stressful. There's an old saying in law school that in the first year they scare you to death, the second year they work you to death, and the third year they bore you to death. And that is absolutely the case. In your first year of law school, it's just like if you ever saw The Paper Chase. It is exactly like that. It's very, very stressful. You have one test for each class, and that's it for the entire semester. If you blow it, you're basically done. So quite a bit of stress. And as I've already told you, I'm not good at handling that. So it was a challenge in the first year to let go of that and to sort of offer that up to God and say, I've got to do the best I can do. I've got to walk in here, do what I can do. In law school, you're forced to compete, for better or for worse, with everyone else in class. It's graded on a curve, so the more people who do worse than you, the better your grade is. And so you're set up to be in a very antagonistic situation, which is kind of like being a litigator. And so it took me a while to get to understand that I really just needed to offer it up and say, it's out of my hands. I can only walk in and do the best thing that I can do that day on that test, and whatever happens, happens. And so with that as sort of my mantra, I ended up being blessed with fairly good grades and ended up graduating in the top 10 in my class, and had the pick of opportunities outside of law school. Well, having worked in the corporate world for a while, I knew that I didn't want to go and work in a big law firm. I had a family at the time. Actually, I was sitting for the bar exam. My wife was pregnant with twins, and we now have 5 kids. So I knew that I was looking for a firm that matched my lifestyle in what I was looking for. One that I wasn't going to be working an obscene amount of hours, but that I could use my skills and use the gifts that I had, for God's greater glory. And so I ended up by, well, one would say it was happenstance, but I know it wasn't at this point. Happened to end up at a firm that was very much in tune with my belief system and in my the way I looked at things from a work perspective, and ended up going into what's referred to as intellectual property law. I'm a trademark lawyer, and do a lot with marketing and intellectual property, trademark, copyright, that kind of stuff. So I found out early on in my practice, after passing the bar, that litigation is kind of a weird thing. Everyone knows litigation is being in court, being the Perry Mason there. And part of my practice is counseling clients on issues from day to day, but a good half of my practice is litigation. And wasn't a favorite thing of mine in the beginning, and for obvious reasons, because I think, again, that stress and the angst that goes along with it. Litigation is, it's all about controversy and conflict. That's what it is. You've got two sides on opposing viewpoints, and they're fighting, and that's what it's all about. And I learned very early on in my career that litigation is a lot of gamesmanship and playing coy and hiding the ball and doing all these things that just weren't me. And it was a very difficult match for me to be in that situation because I just couldn't play that game. Just today, as before I left the office to come here, I got an email, and we're dealing with a very contentious situation in a lawsuit, and the attorney on the other side is hiding the ball. And we found this out, and at the very last minute, and it just, again, I walked out of the office this afternoon and thought as I was coming here, this is exactly what I hate about litigation, and why, and what people, I think, in general hate about attorneys. That's sort of the game that goes on. But again, it's not me. And there's a particular story that happened early in my career that I think sums this all up. We represent a whole bunch of different kinds of clients, big financial firms and insurance companies and manufacturing companies and whatnot, very, very big Fortune 100, 500 companies. But probably 3 or 4 years into my practice, I was blessed to be able to represent a Catholic publishing company, just by sort of a strange twist of events that they came to work with our firm, and got to befriend the folks there. And it was an interesting relationship early on. I didn't really know where it's going. They're not a big client, and so you kind of have to manage that situation, and for it is what it is. But it was at a time when my kids were fairly young, 2 and 3 years old at that point. My oldest ones were 2 or 3 years old. And it was a time in my life in which I was starting to take on that role of passing the faith on to my own children. And I think for everyone who has kids at that point in their lives, they realize probably that they weren't necessarily catechized that well themselves, and they needed to really brush up on things in order to be able to pass it on to their children. And by the grace of God, I ended up working with this publishing company that has a bunch of apologists. And for those of you who haven't heard that term before, someone who's an apologist is someone who defends the faith. So they're very deeply taught in our faith and in the magisterium, and are able to defend it to those who tend to attack it. And there's a couple of folks who work for this, who are well-known speakers for this publishing company. One is Jeff Cavins, who's been on EWTN and Relevant Radio quite a bit. Another is Christopher West, who is a well-known, he's probably the preeminent speaker on Pope John Paul II's theology of the body in the United States. And so I was doing a project for Christopher at that point. Christopher wrote a book on theology of the body, and it's pretty well known. And there's the largest publishing organization in the States, Catholic public organization, is the Daughters of St. Paul. That's the same Daughters of St. Paul that have the bookstore down on Michigan Avenue. They're based out of Massachusetts or Boston somewhere. And we had this very, very contentious lawsuit sort of pending, where they were mad that Christopher wrote a book on theology of the body that looked too close to theirs, and it was just very, very heated. And they had a law firm in Boston representing them that was very, very aggressive, and was fighting tooth and nail on this thing. And you can all imagine in the Catholic publishing arena, there's not gazillions of dollars like there would be on a book that's on the national bestsellers list, but it's a fair amount of money there, and it was important to both sides. So I remember we were going to have this big conference call with the heads of the 5 families all there. All of the Daughters of St. Paul were there, the heads of that organization, their lawyers. We were there. Christopher was there. The heads of Ascension Press were there, and all of these folks were in the room together. And I remember having a number of conversations beforehand on how we were going to handle ourselves and everything else. And we started the meeting, and the head nun from Daughters of St. Paul stopped everybody and wanted to start this very contentious conference call with a prayer. And it stopped everybody in their tracks. Because I know for a fact the lawyer on the other side was not Catholic. and I'm sure made him uncomfortable to do it. They didn't know that I was Catholic, but and most of the other people in the room. But it set a tone for the whole rest of this conversation, and it was a good hour-long, again, contentious discussion, but it set the tone. And I remember my client, not Christopher, but the head of the publishing company afterwards saying to me, he said, we're all on the same team. At the end of the day, we're all on the same team in this, despite the fact that we're here fighting and arguing over who owns what and who can do what with whom here. We're all doing this for God's glory, and that prayer set the tone for the rest of that conversation. So that was sort of a pivotal point in my career as a litigator, because it really affected me deeply going forward. And since then I've had obviously multiple conversations with this client over the years, and we've often started very innocuous conversations with prayers. And again, it set the tone for what we do in those meetings. Now, this is really my only Catholic client for all intents and purposes, and I've never tried that with a secular client. I don't know how well that would go over. But I can't say that I haven't tried it within myself before going into a difficult situation like that. And it's brought really an inner peace to me, and I think it's benefited everybody at the table. And I think my clients over the years have not only accepted that, but appreciated that. And most of them don't even know what my faith is, because I try not to wear it on my sleeve, at least at work. But it bleeds into every single thing I do throughout the day, and especially in the courtroom. So to me, character is incredibly crucial in my line of work. I think clients, in order to want to work with me in the first place, have to trust me, and have to trust in my skills and my intellect in being able to do this, but I think they have to trust in my approach as well too. So happy to entertain any questions.
Do you actually find yourself praying for yourself to go through these things, or like that situation of walking away from the office today, praying for that guy on the other side of the email?
Well, I think after that fact, I end up praying for that guy, and for everyone involved, because it just doesn't help anyone. I mean, I certainly, I pray for the right words and look to the Holy Spirit to guide me as I am leading a conversation, or if I'm in court, in what I'm saying before a judge. But in that case, I think, yeah, I'm praying for the situation, I'm praying for that other side, and saying, come on, this isn't right. There's got to be a better answer to this. Right?
You still play any trumpets or relax?
Occasionally. It's very hard when you play at yeah, well, you do. I mean, it is very much like being an athlete. Once you lose the physical ability to do it, you lose the skill set. And once you play at a professional level, it's very hard to pick up the horn again and play poorly. Play like an 8th grader again, because you just don't want to do it. So I play occasionally. I still have all the equipment and everything, and play from time to time.
Rick, can you tell us about your sense of caring for your clients?
Sure. I think one of the things that sets my firm and my colleagues apart is our ability to have relationships, true relationships with our clients. I mean, a lot of times, a lot of folks I know in the corporate world or in big firms and whatnot, their clients are their source of income, and it's the necessary evil to pay the bills. But we truly enjoy a lot of the folks we work with, and case in point of the folks at Ascension and Christopher and Jeff, I enjoy talking to those guys, and I love doing work for them. It brings me a lot of inner peace to do that. But even our secular clients, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't enjoy and care for them. And I think, there's a couple ways you can approach being a lawyer, I think, and being a litigator especially. A lot of folks use litigation as a means to get the bills up. Litigate, because it's a big moneymaker. Because you're spending a lot of hours preparing and researching and doing all this stuff. And while it's a temporary benefit to me and to the firm in terms of my paycheck and everything else, it doesn't help the client. And especially in my line of practice where they're often not seeing big judgments. It's not like they're getting a $10 million judgment. They're typically getting an injunction. They're getting a judge to say, you can't do that anymore. And so it might cost them $1 million to go to trial to do that. And that doesn't always work. Even if it's a very, very big company and they've got a huge legal budget, it doesn't do that. And I think that concern for our clients beyond ourselves has endeared us to a lot of folks, because that's not always the approach.
A follow-up question then, and when your clients give it back to you about how they see you, how does that come out? What do they say?
Well, I don't know that they always necessarily vocalize it. I think the testament is that we've got clients that we've been doing work with for 25 years, that despite changes in general counsel or whoever it is throughout the years, we continue to do work because they know of our ethics, our character, and our concern for them. So, okay, thank you.